Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In the last video, we understood about what Git exactly is and what source control and version control systems are. We also understood about different types of version control systems like the local version control system, the centralized version control system, and the distributed version control system. And we got a glimpse of how they usually work behind the scenes and what is the exact problem that they were trying to solve that their predecessors had, right? So we went through all of that. We also got into a little bit of history about Git, how it was created and why it was created and things like that. And then we discussed about the reasons why it is different from other version control systems. So things like it, thinking of the data in terms of snapshots rather than maintaining a list of changes that are happening to the files in different versions, and every operation being local in Git, and it checksumming everything to maintain the integrity of the data, and generally the basic nature of Git to just add things, instead of you deleting anything from the history that happened, right? So all of these things were there, and in this video we are going to first talk about the architecture of Git, like the three states in which files all the files usually are in Git. Then we are going to get started with the basics of Git commands in CLI, and we are going to practice a little bit. We are going to create our first repository in this video, and also along with that repository we are going to explore a little bit about what remote repositories are, and why softwares or applications like GitHub and things like those exist. Similar applications, GitLab, Bitbucket, why all of these exist and what's the purpose that they are fulfilling. So we're going to go through all of that. So do make sure to check out this entire video. If you haven't watched the previous video covering all the stuff that we just discussed, then the link to that video would be in the description below for the entire playlist, so do make sure to check that out. And without any further ado, let's get started. So let's talk about the architecture of Git, right? So the architecture of Git, right? So there are usually three states of any file, right? There are usually three states of any file. Now all the files that are there in your project, they are going to be in either of the three states that are there, right? The first state is modified, that you modified your file, right? You did some changes to the file, edited the file, so that's the first state that your file might be in. The second state that your file can be in is staged, and the third state is committed. So these are the three states in which your file would be in. Any file that is there in your project would be in one of these three states. Now when we talk about the modified state, this simply means that you made some changes to the file but you didn't commit it to the DB. Right, so in the last video we talked about how Git is just like a database to maintain all the history of the snapshots of your project, like what did your project look like at a particular version, like what files were there and what did it exactly look like, what was the folder structure, what was the file, what were the contents of the file, things like that. Those are called snapshots, and Git just maintains a history of all the snapshots that were there for that particular version, for the files, right? So modified is that you made some changes but you didn't add, commit these changes into the database that Git maintains, right, with the snapshots, right? So that is the modified state, right? So I'll scroll down a little bit. So for modified, you can say changes made but not committed to the DB. Right, that is your modified state. The second state that we have is the staged state. This means that you have marked the modified file in its current version to go into the DB in your next commit, right? So it might be that you have three files and you made changes to all the three files, but in the next commit you only want to reflect the changes in two files, but the third file in which you made some changes you don't want them to be the part of the commit, right? And commit means that the snapshot of these files are then going to be saved into the DB, right? So you don't want the third file's changes to be reflected in the DB yet. You're still working on it, or making some changes, whatever it is. You don't want it to reflect in the DB, but you still want to make a commit for the rest of the two files, right? So you can just stage the two files that are there, right? Mark them and make a commit, right? So it will be reflected in the DB, but the third file's changes would still be in the modified state, right? So this is for marking a file, marking a modified file in its current state. To go into DB in the next commit. Right? Pretty simple, right? Then you have the third stage, which is the committed state. Committed is simple. The data is safely stored in your local database, right? Local Git database that is there. So data is safely saved in local Git DB, right? So this is your three states in which a file can be in. They can either be modified, you made some changes to the file. They can either be staged, that you mark this file that whenever I make the next commit I want this file changes to be reflected in the local database as a snapshot. And it can be committed, that okay, all the changes that I've made, all the files that were staged, their changes have been saved safely in the local database of Git. So with the understanding of this, that there are three states a file can be in Git, we can safely say that there are three main sections to a Git project. The first section is known as the working tree. The second section is your staging area. The third section is your .git directory, or you can also say that this is your repository, right? We'll understand what this .git means, right? And we'll also take a sneak peek into the three states and play around with it, so don't worry about all of that. But generally, I mean, there are three stages of a Git project, right? The working tree, the staging area, and the repository or the .git directory. Now the working tree is where you are modifying files. So here you are modifying files, or this is the modified state. From here, whatever modifications you would make would go into your staging area, right? This is your staged section of the project, right? And this is simply your committed state. So whatever files you have staged, right, from this working tree to the staging area, right, whatever files you have staged, whenever you make the commit, they will go into the repository. And since this is a repository of all the versions that were there, right, this is a repository for all the versions that ever existed for the project, right? From this repository you can go into the working tree of any version that you want to, right? It could be version 1, 2, 3, right? However many versions are there, right? The repository maintains the working tree for all the versions that was there, and you can check out, right? You can simply check out any of the versions that in this version, how was my project looking like, what were the files that were there, what was the content of all the files, right? You can simply check that out. You can go into the working tree of any version that was there from the repository directly without doing anything, right? So you can check out the working tree of any version at any time. So to like simplify the diagram that we see in front of our screen, we can simply say that the working tree, a single checkout of any version of the project. So this is like a single checkout of any version of the project. Now if we talk about the second staging area that was there, this staging area is simply a file located in .git directory, and .git directory is your repository, right? So this .git is simply your repository. You could say it is your repository, right? So file located in .git directory containing information, containing info about what will go into your next commit, about what will go in your next commit. Okay, so that was for the staging area, and finally we come to the .git directory, or we can simply call it the git directory, right? So this is your git directory. So this simply stores the metadata, stores metadata of the snapshots for different versions of your project, right? So pretty straightforward stuff. This git directory, the .git directory that is there, this is also the .git directory, right? It simply stores the metadata of the snapshots for the different versions that were created for your project, right? And since it contains, the metadata for all the, snapshots that were there for different versions, you can simply check out any of the snapshot of for any version, and that simply becomes your working tree. Then in working tree, you might want to, change some data, right? Send it into the staging area and then commit those changes, right? So now, I mean, how Git works would, eventually start making more and more sense. And the basic Git workflow that is there is that you simply, modify some files in your working tree that is there, right? Again, I mean, coming back to this diagram, right? You simply modified some things in your working tree, right? Made some modifications, then you selectively choose some files, like which are the files or which are the changes that I want to, commit into the DB whenever I make the next commit, right? You selectively choose those files and store them in your .git directory as a file, right? That is the staging area, where you just selectively select some files, that these are the files, the changes in these files I want to be a part of the next commit, right? It creates a simple file in your git directory, right, which stores this information, that what are the changes that are going to be going into the DB in your next commit, right? And then you commit those changes into the Git database, right? The local Git database, right? So this is how, this is the general workflow for how Git works, right? Now, enough talking about the theory of Git, right? Time to get into some practical stuff, right? Now, if I go to my terminal, right, the first thing that I need to do is I need to install Git into this terminal, right? So for that, I mean, GitHub has this official documentation on how to install Git in your device for different operating systems. So it doesn't matter whatever operating system you're using, you can choose to install Git using GitHub Desktop. Now this is going to come with a CLI, tool of Git, and it will also come with a desktop application, a GUI based application with a nice interface for Git, right? Like using Git and doing version control for your softwares. I personally haven't used this desktop application, but if you want to, you can definitely give it a try, right? If you're using Windows, then there are some instructions on, how to install the Git command line tool in Windows, right? So you can follow these, right? And for that, you can use git bash or command prompt, whatever you want. If you're on Mac, right, then you can, do it through an installer if you want to, or you can choose to go with Homebrew, which is the uh, default package manager for Mac OS, right? And if you're using Linux like me, then I mean, again, there are some instructions on how to um, install the Git command line tool on Linux, so you can follow that. And they've mentioned a fun fact as well, that Git was originally developed to version the Linux operating system, as we discussed in the last video as well. So it only makes sense that it's easy to configure and run on Linux, right? So I mean, you can install Git. Once you have the Git installed, you can simply do a git and then hyphen version to check out which version of Git you are using. Mine is 2.34.1. It might be old, but it still works nonetheless, right? If you are installing it right now, you might get a different version. And I think for most of the, at least for Linux and for Mac OS, I think that it comes installed by default. I might be wrong because I don't remember installing Git in this device. But if it's not there, you can run this command to check if it is there or not. If it's not there, then you can simply install it. The link to this documentation on how to install Git would be in the description below, so don't worry about that. And once you have Git installed, I mean, I just installed Git. Now the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to create a directory for my project, right? So I'm going to do an mkdir, right? And my username on Git is Apoorv hyphen on hyphen Git. So I'm going to create a directory with the name of my GitHub username, which is Apoorv on Git, right? I create this directory and I'll go into this directory. I'll see that there's nothing inside this directory, right? Even if I do an ls hyphen a, then I'll see that I only have the dot and the dot folder, which, I mean, I explained what they are in the Linux Masterclass course, so you can go check that out if you haven't already. But I don't have anything in this folder yet, right? Now what I want to do is I want to, if you have seen, it's pretty common these days, but if you've seen in the profile of your GitHub account, a lot of people have, description that is there, right? Instead of directly showing repositories and your contribution graph and all that stuff, a lot of people, have this description written there. So I mean, just to give you an example, if I search for GitHub and Kunal Kushwaha's profile, right, if I go there, then you'll see that before, all the repositories and his contribution graph that is there, he has this text, that is there in his profile, and he can add whatever he wants to. He can add some links to his social media accounts or whatever it is, right? So you have this sort of a thing, right? So what we are going to do in this video is we are going to create that for our GitHub profiles, right? Even I at this point of time don't have it in my profile, right? So I'm going to do that because I mean, if you go into my profile, Apoorv on Git, then you'll see that you can simply see some repositories and my contribution graph, which is not that great. uh, but I mean, I don't have that at this point of time. So what we are going to do is we are going to create that. Right now I created this folder cd. I created this folder Apoorv hyphen on hyphen git, right, which is the username of my GitHub account. Now what I next want to do is I simply want to create a readme.md file, a markdown file, right? So I'm going to do a touch here and I'm going to create a readme.md, right, a markdown file, a simple markdown file, and we are going to create a very simple markdown, right? So you can simply Google Markdown Creator online if you're not aware how to create markdowns, right? I know how to create markdowns, but just to simplify it for you, um, and you can see that yeah, I created some coding standards using this markdown for an open source project that I wanted to have on Virtual Tech School. So you can see that it's already there. So I'm going to quickly get rid of this and I'm simply going to create a markdown. Hi, I am Apoorv Goel or whatever your name is, and this is my YouTube channel, right? I want this to be a link of my YouTube channel, so I'm going to include the text that I want to be linked in square brackets, and after that inside parentheses I'm going to add the link of my channel, right? youtube.com/c/Apoorv Goel main, right? So this becomes a link. Here I can see how my markdown text is going to look like, and I can check by clicking on this link as well. It is giving me an error because I didn't add an HTTPS, but now if I click on this I can see that my YouTube channel opens up, right? So I mean, this is the markdown that I want to create. I'll quickly just copy this, and here I'll open this readme.md through gedit, and I'll paste this. I'll close this, right? Now I can see that I have a file known called readme.md, the markdown file that I just created for myself with the text that we just added in the markdown, right? So I have this. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to initialize a Git project that is there, right? So to initialize a Git project for maintaining your versions of your project, whatever it is, right? You simply do a git and then init, right? So a git and then init initialize the project for you, right? I do this, and it says that it has initialized the project for me, right? And it is using master as the name of my initial branch, right? So it also says that I can simply configure the default name of the branch that gets created. So currently, I mean, it has created master as the initial branch, right? And don't worry what branches are and things like that, right? But yeah, I mean, so it says that it has initialized an empty Git repository. Now if I again do an ls, I'll see that my readme.md is intact, right? It's still there, but if I simply, I'll just quickly increase the size of the text. Right. So again, I mean, just to show you, you can see that I still have the readme.md with me, right? But if I do an ls and then hyphen a, I'll see that I have this .git directory added this time, right? So I have this .git directory added this time, and this .git directory that is there, this is what I meant when I was talking about the Git directory here, right? When I was saying that the Git directory stores the metadata of all the snapshots for different versions of your project. That is the .git directory that I just added with a simple git init command, right? The command was git init, right? Again, I mean, if I run this, then it says reinitialize the existing Git repository because it was already there, right? But this time my Git repository has been created, and I mean, as you can guess, I'm still in my working tree right now. I haven't staged any commits, like staged any files, any changes that I made to any of the files. Now before we add this readme.md file into our staging area, I would like to quickly show you a command where you can see what are the files that are still in the modified stage and what are the files that are in the staged stage, right? So you can simply do a git and then status command, right? If I press enter here, I will say it will say that I'm currently on a branch called master. Again, I mean, we already know that it created the default branch as master. It says that no commits have been made yet, right? And it also says that there are some untracked files, right? Which is, this readme.md, right? So I mean, it says that use git add and then file, right, to include in what will be committed, right? So it says that this readme.md file that is still there, it is still in the working tree, it is still in modified stage, but in order to stage it to be included in the next commit, I have to use a command called git add and then name of the file, right? So here I can simply do a git add and then readme.md, right? And after pressing this, it will simply add the readme.md into the staging area, right? Again, if I do git status this time, right, here it will say that again, I mean, it gives us all the information, but this time it says that the changes that are to be committed, right, is a new file, right, not a modified file. I created a new file this time, right? So a new file which is going to be included in the next commit, which is known as a readme.md file, right? That is the name of the file. And it simply says that if I want to unstage, if I want to remove it from the staging area, because I mean, I accidentally added this file and I don't really want it to be there. So if I want to remove this file from the staging area, it says that I can do a git rm and then hyphen hyphen cached and then the name of the file, which is readme.md. I press enter, it says rm readme.md, which is remove. Again, I do a git status and again it says that I need to add the file, I mean, into my staging area so that it can be included in the next commit, right? Now let's say that I had another file. I'll quickly clear this, right? Let's say I had another file, gedit and then name.txt, a simple file, and in this file I add my name, right? So I add my name in this file, and this time if I do a git status, I have two untracked files, right? Now here in this case I just have two files, but many a times, I mean, when you're working with large projects, you are going to have a lot of files in which you might have made some changes. Let's say that there are 10-15 files in which you made some changes. So are you going to add all of those files manually with the name git add readme.md, git add name.txt? That doesn't make sense, right? So you can simply use a dot to add all the files together, right? So I can simply do a git add and then dot. What this dot will do is it will add all the files that are there currently in the staging area, right? So if I press enter this time and I do a git status, this time it added both the files together in just one go, in with just one command, right? So that is how you move your files from the staging area or from your working tree to the staging area. This is how you move your modified files to the staged files state, right? And now my files are staged this time, right? Both the files have been staged. Let me quickly clear this thing. Now I have two files with me, right? I have the readme.md as well as the name.txt file that have been staged. Right, let me remove the name.txt file, and now I just have the readme.md file which have been in the staging area, right, to be included in the next commit, changes to be committed, and I have an untracked file known as name.txt. So next what I want to do is I simply want to make a commit, right, to for my readme.md. So I can simply do a git and then commit and then hyphen m, which is the message of that commit, what exactly I want to keep as a message, like what am I doing in this commit, what have I done in this commit, right? And usually, I mean, when you're working with large projects, then it's pretty important to keep the messages meaningful, right? That someone can just look at that message and understand what exactly did you do there, right? So I can simply say added readme.md, because I added readme.md in this commit, right? So I simply did added readme.md. It could be fixed issue and then issue number, whatever issue was there, or fixed this particular bug, or whatever it is, right? Some meaningful message should be there, right? So I do a git commit and then hyphen m, add the message, right? This is adding a message is important, right? If I press enter this time, it says that it has created a commit for me, right? Now if I do a git status again, it says that it is on branch master, but this time it's not saying that there are no commits, right? So we already have some commits that exist this time, right? In somewhere, I mean, in the git history that is there, the databases that are there. Now let's say that I make some changes to the file that I created, the readme.md file, right? So I'll open that file, right? And here it says that hi, I am Apoorv Goyal, and I'll simply add a software engineer in parentheses just to like inform who I am, right? I save this, right? Now if I do again a get status here, it says that there are some untracked files. Like untracked files are the files that are created, newly created, and there are some changes in existing files that are not staged for commit, right? And I have a readme.md file which is not staged for commit and it is modified, right? So it says that this readme.md file is modified here. It says that I can add it to update what will be committed, or I can restore the file, get restore the file to discard the changes in the working directory, right? So again, I mean, I can simply just do a get restore and then readme.md, and this will revert all the changes I made to readme.md file, right? But I don't want to do that right now. I want to commit whatever I did, right? But sometimes what happens is that usually when we are working with large projects, it could be that I made some changes to a file a couple of hours ago, right? I made some changes maybe 3-4 hours ago, and now that I'm working on the file, I simply did a git status. I want to see what all files I've changed, and I see a name, the name of some file in which I made some changes, but I don't remember what changes I made, right? So I'm not sure if I should commit this or not. Maybe I did some mistake, maybe I was doing some control s, right, to save the file, but I forgot to press the control, so some extra s added somewhere, right? And it could cause a serious bug in the entire software, some errors, right, and some functionalities. So I don't want that. I want to see what changes I made in a file before committing it, right? And I'm not sure what changes I made. So in that case, you have a command, a simple command known as git diff, right, which shows you the difference between what it was and what it is now, right? So I simply do a git diff and I do a readme.md, like the name of the file which I want to check what the difference is. I press enter and it says that the line, right, the first line that was there in the project, it was earlier like this. The red one shows that earlier it was this, and the green one shows that now it is this, right? So this is the change that you made. Now based on this, you can decide if you want to restore the file or if you want to add the file, move the file to the staging area so that you can commit it, right? So I want to commit it, right? So I'll simply do a git add. I also have a name.txt file which I didn't add into my last commit, so I'm going to do a git add dot to add both the files together. I'll do a git status and I'll see that both of the files have been added into the staging area ready to be committed, I simply do a git commit -m and added occupation in readme. Right, a simple message. I added some occupation in readme. I press enter here, right, and I see that my two files have changed, right, where I have made two insertions and one deletion. One deletion is this line, because this line Git considers it as deleted and Git considers as this line as a new line that has been added, right. So one deletion and two insertions, right, one in the readme.md file and one in the name.txt file, right. So now this is ready. I mean, I created an entire repository in my system, since because I have the .git directory in my folder, in my project directory. I created an entire repository, a local repository, right, and I made some commits into it. So I created a few versions of my project. The first version was the first commit that was there, and the second version was the second commit that was there, right. So this is all that I did up until now. Now this entire project exists only in my system right now, right. And when we were talking about the distributed version control systems, which Git is, right, uh, yeah, so when we were talking about distributed version control systems, we discussed that, let's say that I am dev 1, right, and you who is watching this video is dev 2, right. Now I want to share my history of project and my entire project with you, right. So I need a remote repository for that, a server in which, I mean, my repository is been hosted, right. So since I need a remote repository, a server in which is hosting my repository, so that you can take that repository for yourself, that is where GitHub comes into picture, right. So GitHub is like a simple web application or an website or whatever you may call it. It is a simple tool, an application which hosts all your remote repositories, right. So what we are going to do now is that we are going to simply create an account on GitHub, right. So this is the home page of GitHub. I mean, pretty simple, right. And here you can simply go and sign up to create an account on GitHub, right. You simply go to sign up, and we are doing this just to create a remote repository, right, because the repository that I have right now here is in my local system, right. I want to upload it somewhere so that other developers can see it and other developers can get it, right. The code and the entire history of all the versions, they can get it, right. So that's why I need a remote repository right now, right. And GitHub is a tool, or a web application which provides you with all of that. So as soon as you click on sign up, you'll see this prompt where you can enter your email, password, set up your two-factor authentication, whatever it is. And once that is done, I mean, you would be prompted to your GitHub profile, right. So again, I mean, I'm simply going to go into my profile since I already have an account. So here I want to create a new repository, right. I am currently in my profile on GitHub and I want to create a new remote repository which is going to host the code that I just created, right. So I mean, most of the repositories that I have on my GitHub are private, right. As you can see, private, 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 public, public, private, right. So I mean, my GitHub might look pretty blank, but it has a lot of large scale projects that are there. But I can simply go to repositories in my profile, and I can simply click on new, right, because I want to create a new remote repository. So I can simply click on new, right, and here, I mean, it says that who is going to be the owner of this. So I already have an organization called Virtual Tech School on GitHub, right, in which some projects, some open source projects are coming soon, right. So don't I mean, I'll do some announcements about that, but I want the owner to be me, right, for this, and I want the repository's name to be my username, right. And it simply says that Apoorv on Git /Apoorv on Git is a special repository that you can use to add a readme.md to your GitHub profile. Right, so make sure that you initialize with a readme.md to get started. Right, so this, I mean, it says that it's a special repository, and I mean, I already told you that we are creating, a nice bio for our profile, right? So I'm creating this profile. Make sure that whatever your username is on GitHub, the name of the repository should be your username, right? I want to make this a public repository that is there, and I don't want to add a readme file right now because I already have it in my local thing, right? And for license, I mean, I don't need a license either, right? I'll just simply create a repository, right? So I created a repository, and now I see this interface where it says that I can simply quickly set up my repository, right? Or to create my repository through command line, I can do all of this stuff, right? Now, I mean, here it has given me one command. I mean, it gives me some command for initializing and adding the readme.md file, right? And first it gives me a command to create a readme.md file, like echo this thing in my readme.md. Then it says to initialize it, to add the file, to commit it, right? And then to like select your branch, whatever branch you want to commit it into. Don't worry about branches and stuff. Then it says to this command, right? And then it says this, right? So the first thing, and it says that or create a new repository on the command line, right? So we are not creating a new repository right now. We already have a local repository existing in our system, right? The repository that I just created, it has a .git folder. So I already initialized that repository and I made some commits into this repository. So I already have a repository existing in my local system. So that is when we go into this second part, right? Or push an existing repository from the command line, right? So it simply says that you copy these commands, right? The first command is get remote add origin, right? And we'll understand this command later, get remote add and whatever it is, right? But we simply copy paste this command. I press enter, right? I go back, I take the second command, right? I press enter. Just make sure that this time, since I when I initialized my project, my Git repository, it says that the branch it created by default was the master branch, right? So what I'm going to do is, instead of copying the main, because GitHub takes the name main as the default branch, but Git tool still works on the master as the main default branch, right? So instead of copying this get branch hyphen capital M and then main, I'm going to replace the main with the master, since the branch that got created for me is the master branch, right? I press enter, right? Then I copy this command, right? I again replace master, and don't worry about these commands. There's get branch and get push and get remote add origin. We'll talk about this later, right? I simply press an enter. It says that it uploaded it, right? So I didn't get any errors. Now if I refresh this right now, I'll see that the code that I added has been created with two commits, right? Here you can see that there are two commits to this entire repository that is there, right? I go on the commits, I can see that the first commit was added readme.md that I created about 14 minutes ago, right? So I go into this one, and it says that hi, I am Apoorv Goel and this is my YouTube channel, right? This was the first thing. I only added one file here, right? I can see an option to browse files, right? So if I click on browse files, then here I will go into the working tree of that particular version where I just had one single commit, the first commit of the project, with the simple readme.md which says hi, I am Apoorv Goel and this is my YouTube channel, right? Then going back, I have this second commit which is added occupation in readme, which is the second commit that I created. I click on this, right? I can see that these were the changes that were made, right? We saw that in Git diff, we saw that there were two changed files with two additions and one deletions, right? if you remember. So here you can see that this line was deleted from readme.md, this line was added into readme.md, and this new file with this line has been added. If I go into browse files here, then currently I am in the working tree of the second commit that I made. Right. So the thing that we were discussing about three stages of GitHub and the GitHub architecture must be making a lot of sense now. And as you can see, GitHub is simply just to represent, uh, your Git repositories. Like it's a tool that helps you create remote repositories, first thing. And second thing, it gives you a nice representation about your working trees and your different versions of your code and things like that, in a very nice interface, right, that you otherwise might would have explored through command line. And it also gives you some other things like, adding issues into a project, you know contributing into other projects and things like that, but we'll get into all of that later. For now, we have created this repository locally and then we added it into Git. Right. Now here, if I again this time go into my profile, right, I go into my profile, then I can see that this time the text that I just created, hi, I'm Apoorv Goel, brackets software engineer, and this is my YouTube channel. Right, I click on this link and I can see that my YouTube channel is opening up. Right, so we successfully created our first repository. Right, now we created this repository entirely through command line this time, right, but that's not the only way to do it. Right. um, what I'll do is I'll simply delete this repository and create it again. So what I want to do is, if I scroll down here, you can say that I want to delete this repository. I'll quickly type the name of this repository. It wants me to type the whole thing, and I understand the consequences of deleting this repository. My repository is gone. Right, again I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to create it with Apoorv on Git. Right, I want this repository to be public. I want to add a readme.md file, or I can choose not to add it. Right, and I create this repository. Right, I again created this repository. If you want to create a new thing from your command line, then you can follow these instructions that are given above. Right, but I can simply, do some things from here as well. So it says that to get started by creating a new file or uploading an existing file. I don't have an existing file. Right, I do have an existing file, but I want to create a new file, so I can simply create a new file. Right, I can give the name readme.md again. Right, and it says that it will appear on your profile. This is a special repository, whatever it is, and I'll say that, hi, I am Apoorv Goel, and this is my YouTube channel. Right, again, I mean, I'll keep this in square brackets. After that, I'll add some parentheses. Inside that, I'll add the link of my channel. This is my working tree right now. Right, I did this. Then it says that I can directly commit changes since it is GUI. I don't need to actually stage my modified files that are there. By default, it's create readme.md, which is fine. I don't want to add some additional description. I'm simply going to save it, and I can see a readme.md got created. Again, if I go into my profile, right, I'll see that this text is reflecting on my profile. Right, now whenever now let's say that you have a remote repository that already exists. Right, there would be times when you want to get this, like the entire version and the entire code of this project, you want to get it into your local system. Right, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to remove my Apoorv on Git directory from here. Right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply copy this https thing. Right, I'm going to copy this I'm going to paste it here, that link, and before this link I'm going to add a simple git clone. Right, so I want to clone this remote repository that existed on Git. Right, I press enter, it says that it's cloning Apoorv on Git for me, and it has done that. Right, I can simply now go into Apoorv on Git. I came into the folder, I can simply do an ls, and I can see that there's only one file that exists, readme.md, whose content is this. I am Apoorv Goel and this is my YouTube channel. Right, so all of this is done at this point of time. Right, now let's say I am some other developer and whatever I do in this browser is done by some other developer. Right, so let's say that this other developer that is currently in the browser, they go into the project, right, and they see the raw version of it, or not the raw version. Yeah, so they have this edit icon here, right? This is the readme.md file. They have this edit icon here. Let's say this other developer clicks on this edit icon, and they simply add a software engineer here, right? They simply add it and update readme.md by default, and they do this, right? So now, I mean, this readme.md file that exists on the browser has a different version because some other developer made some changes to the code that was there, right? And this code that I have on my system is different, right? It doesn't have this new software engineer that has been added, right? It doesn't has that. So if I want to get that code in my system, I can simply pull that data or pull that new commit, whatever new changes have been made from the remote repository into the local repository that I have through a simple command called git pull. Right, I simply do a git pull, no other thing required. I press enter and I have all the changes that were made in that remote repository by some other developer in my local system now. Right, I do a gedit and then readme.md here, right, and I can see that I have this new software engineer added. Right, now I notice that the other engineer made an issue and they didn't add a closing parentheses after software engineer, right, which is which is not acceptable, right? So what I want to do is I want to fix this. I add a parentheses here, I save it. Right, now if I do a git status, it says that I have modified the readme.md file. If I do a git diff, right, and readme.md, it will say that I modified this, and here you will see that here I didn't add a closing parentheses earlier, but I've added it this time. Right, so I did these changes. Now I want to do, what I want to do is I want to commit these changes first. So git commit and then -m fixed readme.md. I fixed it. Right, it says that I haven't staged the commit, so I first need to add everything, git add dot or readme.md, whatever it is. Then I can simply do git commit. Right, I committed these changes into the remote repository, and after that finally what I want to do is I have these changes committed in my local repository, but I want to push this to the remote repository. So I can simply do a git and then a push. Right, nothing else. I do a git push, I press enter, my code has been pushed into the remote repository. Now here, if I refresh this, I can see that the closing parentheses has been added, and then now it was updated about 30 seconds ago. Right, if you go here, or not here, yeah, if you go here, right, you will see that this time I have 3 commits, right? So the create readme.md that I did from the browser, then I updated my readme.md, right? Then I pulled the data, I saw some errors, I fixed it, I pushed it back through git push, right? And that commit that I did locally is also reflected in the remote repository, right? So that's how usually Git works. Now one last final bit before we end this video is that since I was doing some changes here, I mean I did some changes, then I pushed it into my remote repository or whatever I did, right? How did GitHub know that this system belongs to me, right? Or how does Git knows that this remote repository I have the access to push data into this remote repository? How did Git know in that first place, right? Whatever changes I made, I mean I pushed the changes earlier as well on the Git remote repository, then I deleted the repository, I created it again from the browser, I pulled some changes, and I saw the missing parentheses, I added that parentheses, I pushed it again. So how is Git identifying that I have the authorization to push into that repository, first thing? Or how does GitHub know that this push that is coming to it, is coming from me, who has the authorization, who is the owner of the repository? How do they know, right? They know it because I already had Git installed and I had already configured my email and password into my Git config files, right? So whenever you try to push something into Git remote repository, into GitHub, right? Whenever you try to push something, it is always going to ask you for your email, it is always going to ask you for your password, right? And I didn't had to enter it because I already had it saved into my system, right? So to simply add this configurations for your name, email and password, you can do a simple git config, right? And you can set your configurations for global system, right? So you can simply do a global, and then you can define what variable you are setting, right? So you are maybe setting your name, right? Your name could be Apoorv Goyal, right? I mean that's my name, but your name could be something, right? So you do this get config hyphen hyphen global and then your name, then you can set your email id, which in my case is apoorvillas@gmail.com. This is the id through which I created my GitHub account, right? Now do note in these two options, do note in these two options, my first one is gone, but do note in these two commands that the first one that I did, let me just clear this. Yeah, so when I did this, I added the double quotes here because I have a space in between of my name, but in the second one I didn't add any double quotes, right? So in first one I added my name, in the second one I added my email, and in the third one I need to add my password, right? So I need to add a password into my Git, right? So your regular password that you set for Git won't work in this case, so you'll have to generate a password, right? Now to generate a password, what you can simply do is you can go into settings, right? You can go into the settings of your GitHub account, right? Inside the settings, if you scroll down here, you will at the very bottom you will see developer settings, right? So you click on the developer settings. In the developer settings you will see this third option, personal access tokens, right? So you click on personal access tokens, right? And I have already created a couple of um, access tokens for me, but you can simply create your own access token. You can click on this generate new token, right? And you can add a note for whatever token you are creating. So I have created a token for master access which gives me access for everything, right? So you can create a note for yourself, whatever you want to do. Then you can set an expiration, like after how long will this access token get expired. So if you're working on your personal system and it's not your office device or anything like that, then you can set no expiration for that. Otherwise, I mean, you can choose for how long do you want to do it, and then you can say that what is the scope of that access token that you're creating for yourself. Is it in repo can you see the status, deployment, public repo, repo invite, security? So you can read all these things, like what are these, right? You can read more about the authentications as well, like what are the scopes and what do they grant you, right? And based on that you can select what all authentications you need. You can generate a token. When you generate a token, you will see a string which will only be visible once, right? And whatever that string is, you do a git config user dot password, right? Type whatever that string is here, copy paste it simply, press enter. That is going to act as your password, right? Your regular password won't work. You have to create a personal access token, right? And for personal access token, I mean, you can simply go to settings. From settings you can go to developer settings, from developer settings to personal access tokens, and then generate new token. Here you can, clicking on this read more about OAuth scopes, you can simply read whatever you want to about the OAuth scopes, right? And this is how, I mean, things are going to work, right? You can read more about OAuth scopes, and here in the personal tokens you can see whatever tokens you already have. If you want to delete any existing token, then you are free to do that. But yeah, I mean, you'll need to set these configurations through a simple, get config hyphen global, and then user dot name, user dot email, and user dot password, and your password is going to be the one that you generate from your developer settings. Okay, so that's there. But one thing that is there is that I mean, when you generate, when you set these configs, right, Git doesn't remember these configs, right? So it won't remember these configs. Make it remember the configs that you just entered, right? You can again do git config, right? I mean, when you enter those configs, if you restart your system, the next time you are coming back into your system, those configs won't be available anymore to you, right? You'll again have to enter your email, you'll again have to enter your password, right? Which doesn't make sense, right? So in order to like have them remembered by Git, you can simply do git config, and after that you can add a credential dot helper, right? So git config and then credential dot helper, and then after that you can simply add a store, right? So get config credential dot helper store, right? What this will do is this will store the configs that you entered permanently into git, like the git config files, right? Now if you don't want it to store it, permanently, but instead you wanted to store temporarily, then instead of the store keyword that we entered here, instead of the store keyword, what you can do is simply add a cache. So this time it will store it temporarily for some time, right? It won't be long. I'm not sure for how long it stores, but because I haven't tried this, but it will store it for some time, right? So this is how you can set your configurations. Once your configurations are set, then you would have the access to pull all the latest changes that are there, made to any remote repository. You can push your changes to any remote repository. It will never ask you for your email and the password again. If you don't set your configurations with the get config command, then it will ask for your email and password each and every time you want to access it. That's pretty much it for this video. Now I hope that you have a more clearer understanding about how Git works and the three different states of a file that we talked about. I hope it makes more sense with all the basic Git commands that we just went through. In the coming videos we are going to talk about what GitHub issues are and what different branches are and things like that. So we'll dive more into the git commands that are there. We'll also try to understand a little bit of terminology that we skipped, like what does the git remote command does, or git push, and then origin main and all that stuff. What is all of that? So we'll understand all of that. And apart from that, we are also going to start understanding a little bit about forking projects and getting started with open source. So do make sure to stay tuned for that. Learn in public, use the hashtag learning with Apoorv. I hope you have a better understanding about how Git works. And if you got something to learn out of this video, then do make sure to write a blog about it or a tweet about it. Tag me in those tweets and use the hashtag learning with Apoorv. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, peace.